They mocked me at my own son's wedding, bragged about saving him with a job, but they had no idea I owned their entire company until I walked into their boardroom Monday morning. My name is Robert, I'm 58, and I never wanted to be one of those overbearing parents who can't let go of their children's lives. But what happened at my son's wedding just a few days ago has left me reeling in a way I didn't expect. I've been holding it all in, trying to process every moment before saying anything, but the more I think about it, the more I realize I can't stay silent. The disrespect I faced at that wedding was unlike anything I've experienced, and not just from strangers, but from the very people who now call themselves my family. My son recently married into a family that considers themselves highly prestigious, old money, polished accents, lavish tastes, and a deep-seated belief that they exist on a level above the rest of us. But what they didn't know, and what they're only just starting to learn, is that the very company they hold so dear, the business they brag about at every social event, has been mine for over a year. And the way they treated me at that wedding? Well, let's just say that Monday morning gave me the perfect chance to return their arrogance with a dose of reality they never saw coming. I wasn't born into wealth. I grew up in a tiny town in the Midwest, where every dollar was earned through sweat, calluses, and late nights. My parents were immigrants who came to this country with nothing but hope and the belief that if you worked hard enough, you could make a life worth living. I took those lessons to heart. I paid my way through community college while pulling night shifts at a local factory. I started my first business out of my garage, fixing computers for small businesses that couldn't afford the big tech giants. Over 30 years, that little venture grew into a full-fledged technology solutions corporation. From there, I expanded into acquisitions, quietly purchasing struggling firms, rebuilding them from the ground up, and folding them into my holding company. I never flaunted my wealth. Even when my company took off, I kept things simple. I wore modest clothes, drove a reliable car, and lived in the same house I bought with my wife before she passed away. She died when our son was still a child, and from that moment on, it was just him and me. I raised him to understand the value of work, of respect, of humility. He knew I was comfortable, but he never knew just how far I had come, because I wanted him to find his own path, his own success without riding on my shoulders. The problem started around 6 months ago, when my son got engaged and wedding planning began. He met his wife during grad school, and honestly, she's a wonderful person. She's kind, intelligent, driven, and most importantly, she loves my son with her whole heart. I could see it from the very first time I met her. But her parents? That's a whole different story. From our first meeting, they treated me like I was invisible. They were too busy gloating about their country club memberships, their international homes, their seasonal ski trips, and the fact that their daughter deserved only the best. They barely let me get a word in. When I offered to contribute to the wedding costs, they politely declined, but not in the way that makes you feel respected. No, they said something along the lines of, "We don't want the budget to limit the experience." I later found out they told my son that accepting financial help from me might diminish the sophistication of the wedding. The venue? Their ultra-exclusive country club, of course. They insisted it be held their A-place dripping with wealth and pretentiousness, where every guest was judged by their clothes, car, and company name. When the day of the wedding finally came, I put on a navy blue suit tailored by the same local shop I've used for years. It was sharp, comfortable, and perfectly suitable for a formal event. But apparently, it wasn't up to the standards of my son's new mother-in-law. She glanced at me, then whispered loudly to her friends, "Some people just don't understand what wedding attire means." She then proceeded to point out every designer label in the room, as if brand names were more valuable than character. I ignored it. I wasn't there for fashion statements. I was there for my son. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Every word, every vow, every glance between them was filled with love. But the reception, that's when the real insults began. During the cocktail hour, I overheard my son's father-in-law talking to a group of guests, bragging about how he'd given my son a chance at their company. "We brought him in at an entry-level position," he said. "Really helped him get out of his humble beginnings." The guests nodded politely while he continued, oblivious to the truth. You see, that very company, Jensen and Associates, is one of the firms my holding company quietly acquired last year. They have no idea that their paychecks, their benefits, their title on the door all come from me. I didn't buy it to humiliate them. I saw potential in the company despite its flawed leadership. But listening to him dismiss my son's education, his MBA, his previous experience, as if he'd simply been plucked from a cornfield and thrown a lifeline, made my blood simmer. They seated me at a table in the back corner, nowhere near the main family circle. I didn't mind at first. I thought maybe it was an oversight. But then, when it was time for family photos, I tried to join my son. His mother-in-law smiled politely, then said, "Let's get the immediate family first. Okay? We'll call you in after." My son looked ready to argue, but I just nodded. I wasn't going to start a scene. Not on his day. But inside, something was cracking. The final straw came during the speeches. His mother-in-law took the microphone and spoke about how their daughter had always dreamed of uplifting those around her. She looked right at me when she said, "She's even helping elevate her husband into the life he deserves." Then came the father-in-law's turn. He laughed as he said, "Maybe now our new son can help his father find something better than..." What is it? A small computer shop. A few guests chuckled, clearly uncomfortable. Others just looked down. I sat there, drinking my water, holding back a smile. Not from joy, but from the irony. Because I could have ended their entire business with one phone call. And that's only the beginning. I sat there quietly, nodding along, offering polite smiles where appropriate, but inside my mind was racing. Not with anger that had already settled, but with something far more dangerous. Clarity. I had the power to humble these people without raising my voice, without making a scene, without lifting a finger at that wedding. All I needed was time. Because what they didn't realize, what they couldn't possibly fathom, was that their beloved Jensen and Associates, the family business they treated like royalty, had been hemorrhaging money for years. Inefficiency, outdated practices, poor management, you name it. When my firm acquired it last year, it was practically on life support. And the only reason they still had jobs, the only reason their company wasn't absorbed by a competitor and scrapped for parts, was because I believed there was still something worth saving. But what infuriated me more than their treatment of me was how they treated others that night. I watched them snap at waitstaff for the slightest mistake. A wine glass not being full enough, a napkin folded the wrong way, the dessert course being a minute too late. I saw a young waitress near tears after the mother-in-law scolded her loudly for spilling a drop of water on the tablecloth. She didn't even look at her, just waved her off like she was some insignificant insect. I wanted to say something right then and there, but I didn't, because this wasn't about me anymore. This was about my son. This was his day, and I wasn't going to ruin it no matter how much it hurt. When the reception ended, I shook hands, gave congratulations, and even thanked the in-laws for hosting such a lovely event. My son kept giving me apologetic looks all night, and his wife looked mortified at her parents' behavior. She kept trying to involve me in conversations, asking if I was comfortable, making sure I had everything I needed. She's a good person, and I know none of this was her fault. But still, there was only so much I could tolerate. The next morning, I received an email. A group message sent to all wedding guests from the in-laws, sharing photos from the event. They included dozens of images of themselves, their friends, their side of the family, while I was barely visible in any. And then, as if that wasn't enough, the email included a section on embracing cultural differences. It talked about how money isn't everything, how families can come together from all walks of life, and how important it is to be patient with those who don't share the same social etiquette. It was a thinly veiled dig at me. And that was when I knew I couldn't let this slide anymore. That Monday, I called an emergency board meeting for Jensen and Associates. As the majority shareholder through my holding company, I had every right to do so. I walked into that boardroom dressed in my typical business attire. A crisp white shirt, navy jacket, polished shoes, professional but not flashy. As soon as I entered, I saw their faces. His father-in-law was mid-sip from his coffee mug, which slipped from his fingers and shattered on the table. His designer suit now had a large brown stain down the front. His mother-in-law, who also sat on the board as a family consultant, looked like she'd seen a ghost. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I simply introduced myself, calmly, clearly, and with authority, as the owner of their parent company. Then I laid out the purpose of the meeting, a full restructuring of management operations. I explained that all positions would be reevaluated based on performance, efficiency, and leadership capability. I used the exact same tone they used with me at the wedding: cold, patronizing, clinical. And then I presented the data. A detailed 5-year report showcasing their management failures, declining market share, rising turnover, stagnant innovation. Slide after slide, I watched their faces pale as they realized just how much I knew and how much they'd ignored. These weren't just numbers. These were the receipts that exposed everything they'd been sweeping under the rug. The room was silent when I finished. No one moved. No one spoke. I closed my laptop, looked around the table, and simply said, "Let me be clear. This isn't about revenge. This is about accountability. What you do next will determine whether you still have a seat at this table." And then I left. In the days that followed, something interesting happened. Word spread. Somehow, employees across Jensen and Associates caught wind of who I really was. And suddenly, my inbox began flooding with messages. Dozens of emails, some from people I'd never met before, all sharing their own experiences. Stories of being belittled in meetings, of ideas being ignored because they came from the wrong department, of talented individuals leaving because they were tired of being treated like they didn't matter. It was heartbreaking but not surprising. What had happened at that wedding wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a reflection of how these people operated every day. And while I had stayed quiet before, that time was over. I made it my mission to reshape that company from the ground up, not just to fix the numbers, but to repair the culture. My son called me a few days after the meeting. He was laughing, not because he thought it was funny, but because he was in absolute disbelief. Apparently, his in-laws had a sudden change of heart. They'd reached out to him, saying they wanted to get to know me better, that maybe we should have a family dinner soon. Casual, of course, nothing fancy. Quite a departure from their previous behavior. I couldn't help but smile at the irony. The same people who could barely look me in the eye at the wedding now wanted to play nice, most likely out of fear, not respect. I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to let them sit with their own discomfort for a little longer. But eventually I agreed, not for them but for my son. He deserved a peaceful future. And if that meant sitting across from those two with a smile on my face, I could manage it. When the dinner finally happened, it was exactly what you'd expect from people who'd been humbled but not yet changed. They were polite, gracious even, but there was an edge of tension beneath every word. They apologized for their behavior at the wedding, said it was all just misunderstandings and stress from the event. I nodded, accepting the apology publicly, though I could see in their eyes that the real reason was job security. Still, I played along. I even brought up a few topics they'd understand: management practices, employee satisfaction, expansion plans. When I mentioned the feedback I'd received from their staff, they went quiet. I suggested they enroll in a leadership ethics course the company was rolling out. They agreed without hesitation. My daughter-in-law was still clearly ashamed of her parents' past behavior. She pulled me aside after dinner and said she hoped I didn't hold any of it against her. I hugged her and told her not to worry, that we all make mistakes, but what matters most is what we do after. She smiled with relief, and I knew then that despite everything, my son had chosen well. A month has passed since that wedding. The company has already begun transforming. We've implemented new management training programs focused on empathy, accountability, and professional conduct. I've personally sat in on a few sessions to set the tone. The in-laws, well, they're trying. I'll give them that. Old habits die hard, but even the most stubborn people can learn when their comfort is on the line. As for my son and his wife, they're thriving, focused on their careers, building their future together, unbothered by the chaos that once surrounded them. And me? I'm doing fine. In fact, I've been thinking about finally letting my son see that vintage Porsche I've kept stored away for years. Maybe it's time to show him that even the humblest man can have a few luxuries, if he's earned them the right way. Thank you for reading. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button, give it a thumbs up, and share it with anyone who needs a reminder that respect is worth more than wealth. Got a story idea? Drop it in the comments below. We'd love to hear it. See you in the next story.